Welcome to my channel, where creativity meets originality. I'm here to bring you content that stands out, keeps you engaged, and maybe even surprises you. If that sounds like your vibe, go ahead and subscribe. You won't regret it.
I never thought I'd be the kind of man who checks his wife's phone. 43 years old, and I'd always considered myself above that kind of paranoia. But there I was, sitting alone in the dark of our living room at 11 at night, her cell phone glowing in my hand, my pulse doing things it had no business doing. It started with a laugh, not mine. Hers, my wife, had been in the kitchen for the better part of an hour, supposedly meal prepping for the week. I could hear the sound of containers being opened and closed, the occasional clatter of a cutting board. Normal stuff, domestic stuff, the kind of background noise that blends into a marriage after enough years. Then I heard her laugh, a specific laugh, not the one she uses when something on TV is funny, or the polite one she pulls out at her firm's holiday parties. This was the low, private kind, the kind that belongs to a different room. I told myself I was imagining things. I went back to the game I'd been watching, poured the last of my beer, reminded myself that I trusted her. We'd been married 11 years. We had a daughter, Reese, who was 9 and obsessed with horses and could eat her weight in cereal. We had a mortgage and a dog and dinner reservations we kept missing and all the complicated, beautiful, exhausting furniture of our real life together. I trusted her, past tense, because when she came to bed that night and set her phone on her nightstand face down, something in me sat up. She never put it face down. In 11 years, I'd never once noticed her do that. I waited until she was asleep. I'm not proud of it. I want to be honest about that. I picked up her phone and I went through it, and some part of me was already bracing for what I'd find before I even unlocked it. Her passcode was Reese's birthday, same as it had always been. That detail made me feel guilty for about 4 seconds. Then I saw the name. Cody. I didn't recognize it at first. She worked in commercial real estate. She knew a lot of people I'd never met, had clients and brokers and contractors rotating through her days. So for maybe half a minute, I let myself believe this was professional. A client, a colleague, someone from the office with a bad sense of boundaries. Then I read the messages. Not all of them. I got about 12 in before my hands started shaking. There was nothing explicit, nothing that would hold up in a courtroom as evidence of a physical affair. But what was there was worse in its own way. Intimate, warm. The kind of easy shorthand you only develop with someone you've let get close. Inside jokes. References to shared moments. A comment about something she'd told him that she'd never once mentioned to me. And at the end of the thread, from earlier that same evening, this. You should come over sometime. When he's not around. I put the phone back face down on her nightstand, exactly the way she'd left it. Then I went and sat in the living room in the dark. I've thought a lot about that hour since. I didn't cry, didn't punch anything, didn't do what I'd probably do in a movie version of this moment, which is storm back into the bedroom and start yelling. I just sat there in the dark with our dog Pepper, who had wandered out to find me, and put her chin on my knee. And I stared at nothing and felt the ground reorganize itself under everything I thought I knew. The thing is, it didn't come out of nowhere. That's the part I keep circling back to. There had been a distance growing for a while. A year, maybe more. I chalked it up to her getting busy at the firm. She'd made senior associate, which was a big deal, which meant longer hours and more travel and a constant low hum of professional stress that I tried to stay out of. I figured it was temporary. That's what you figure when you've been with someone long enough to have weathered other rough patches. You tell yourself it's a phase because phases end. But there had been small things. The way she'd stopped asking about my day with any real curiosity. How dinner together had gradually become dinner at the same table on our separate phones. A trip we'd planned for our anniversary that she'd rescheduled twice and then quietly stopped mentioning. I brought it up once, and she'd said she was just exhausted. That she needed a weekend at home, not a weekend of airports and hotel beds. I believed her, because that was the kind of man I'd been for most of our marriage. Steady, trusting, not looking for problems where there might not be any. You can love someone and still stop really seeing them. I know that now. I had stopped seeing her, and I'd assumed without checking that she was fine. I found out she wasn't. The next morning was a Tuesday. I got Reese ready for school on autopilot, packing her lunch, finding her other shoe, answering the 7,000 questions a 9-year-old generates before 8 a.m. My wife moved through the kitchen in her work clothes, looking composed and put together in the way she always did before a showing. And I watched her and said nothing, and she caught me watching and gave me a small smile, And I smiled back and felt sick. I drove Reese to school, and then I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. I kept replaying the message. When he's not around. 4 words. She hadn't agreed to it, hadn't replied to it with anything that confirmed she was planning to go. But she hadn't shut it down either. She'd sent back a laughing emoji and then, "You're terrible." Which is, I've learned, not a rejection. It's an invitation to keep going. I called my brother. He's 5 years older than me and lives in Cincinnati and has been through a divorce that wrecked him for 3 years. And he's the only person in my life who I knew would tell me the truth without enjoying it. "Give me the facts," he said. "Just the facts, not what you think it means." So I did. Messages. No explicit plans. No confirmation they've been physical. But the tone of the whole conversation, a pattern that had clearly been building over weeks at minimum. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What do you want out of the next conversation you have with her?" "The truth," I said. "Okay," he said. "Then you need to go in calm enough to actually hear it." That was the hardest part. Going home that evening and sitting across from her at dinner and letting Reese talk about the horse unit in her class, nodding at the right moments, acting like I was still the same man I'd been 24 hours ago. My wife glanced at me a few times with that careful attention I'd started to recognize, the look of someone monitoring a situation. After Reese was in bed, I sat down on the couch. I said her name. Not with heat in it, just flat and clear. She looked up from her phone. I said, "Who's Cody?" She went very still, and in that stillness, before she said a single word, I got my first answer. "He's a broker," she said. "I've told you about him." "You haven't," I said. She did something with her face that I can only describe as recalibrating. He's just someone from the industry. We work in overlapping areas, sometimes share leads. I read the messages, I said. The room got quiet in a way that felt different from regular quiet. She set her phone down slowly. She didn't ask which messages, or act confused, or try to figure out how much I'd seen. That told me everything about her state of mind. "I can explain," she said. "I know you can," I said. "I want you to." What followed was one of the more surreal conversations of my life. She started from the defensive position. It wasn't what it looked like. They were friends. The tone was just how people in her industry communicated. I was reading into it. I let her go. I didn't interrupt, didn't raise my voice. I just waited. When she ran out of momentum, I asked one question. "Has he ever been in this house?" The pause before she answered was about half a second too long. "Once," she said, "to drop off some documents." "When?" "In September." "A beat." "When you were in Phoenix for your conference." There it was. I stood up. Not in a dramatic way, just because I needed to move. I walked to the kitchen and stood at the counter for a while with my back to her. I was doing the math on September. The length of the thread on her phone, the way the messages had the texture of something that had been going on for a while, something that had survived small escalations. She followed me into the kitchen. She didn't touch me, just stood in the doorway. "Nothing happened," she said. "When he came over, nothing happened." "But you wanted it to," I said. I wasn't asking. She didn't answer right away. And again, the silence was its own answer. "I don't know," she finally said. I think I was flattered by the attention. It had been a long time since someone had. She stopped. "Since someone had what?" I asked. She looked at the floor. Made me feel like the smartest person in the room, like what I do matters, like I'm. She stopped again. I turned around and looked at her for a real moment, maybe the first one in months. "You think I don't think those things about you?" "I think you used to show it," she said quietly. "And then you stopped." I opened my mouth to argue and then closed it, because something landed in my chest that I hadn't expected. Not guilt, exactly. More like recognition. I thought about the last time I'd asked about a case she was working on with genuine curiosity. The last time I'd come to something she'd invited me to. The way I'd stopped going to her firm events because they felt obligatory and I was tired after work and the parking was always a nightmare. I thought about how, somewhere in the accumulated weight of our routine, I'd stopped treating her career like something I was proud of and started treating it like background noise. I didn't say any of that. Not yet. I still had things I needed to understand first. "Did you give him any reason to think you'd actually go to him?" I asked. "Any real reason?" She was quiet. "Because that message, when he's not around, That's not something a man sends unless he has some basis for thinking the door is open. She sat down at the kitchen table. She looked exhausted. I didn't tell him to stop, she said finally. Every time he said something he shouldn't, I should have told him to stop, and I didn't. I pulled back, but I never shut the door. I know what that is. I know what I was doing. I sat down across from her. I need you to tell me one thing honestly, I said. And I need you to not give me the answer you think I want. I need the real one. She looked at me. If he hadn't sent that message last night, I said, and I'd never found out about any of this, where were you headed? She was quiet for a long time. I don't know, she said. That's the honest answer. I don't know, and that scares me more than anything else I could tell you right now. I sat with that for a while. The dog padded into the kitchen and drank from her bowl and padded back out. Somewhere upstairs, Reese's clock radio had clicked on by accident, playing something faint. What do you want? I asked, not accusatory. A real question. She put her face in her hands. When she looked up again, she was crying, and it was the kind of crying that takes something out of a person, not the performative kind. I want to not have done this, she said. I want you to still be able to look at me. I want Reese to not find out any of this ever happened. I want to be the person I told myself I was. You're going to have to earn those things back, I said. I can't just hand them to you. I know. And Cody is done. Not professionally limited. Done. I don't want to hear his name associated with your work, your phone, your email. I don't care how you manage it. She nodded. I'll refer him out to someone else at the firm. I can do it by end of week. By end of week means nothing to me, I said. By end of tomorrow. She nodded again. What happened next was not a happy ending dropped from the sky. I want to be clear about that. We slept in the same bed that night because I didn't see any reason to make Reese's morning weird, but we lay there in the dark like two people on separate continents, and I stared at the ceiling for a long time listening to her breathe and trying to figure out what I was feeling, which turned out to be too many things at once to name. I spent the next 2 weeks doing something I'm not sure I'd ever done before. I paid close attention. Not surveillance style, not checking her phone again. I'd made a decision not to do that. What I mean is, I paid attention to her, the actual her, not the version of her I'd been coasting alongside for the past few years. I started asking about her cases again, not in the half-present way I'd been asking before, the way you half-ask about someone's day when you're also watching something on your laptop. I put the laptop down. I asked the follow-up question. I remembered the details from one week to the next, so I could bring them up the next time. I'm not telling you this because it makes me sound good. I'm telling you because I think I'd stopped doing it so gradually that I genuinely hadn't noticed. And when I started again, I could see what it meant to her. It's an uncomfortable thing realizing you'd been careless with someone you loved and not known it. She referred Cody out. She showed me the email she sent. I hadn't asked to see it. She offered it. That mattered to me. What also mattered, about a month later, she came home from work looking like she'd been through something. And she sat down and told me, without being asked, that he'd tried to contact her through a colleague's email. She showed me that too, and then she showed me the response she'd sent, which was 3 sentences, professional and cold, that closed every door. I didn't want you to find out from somewhere else, she said. I believed her, and believing her felt different than the automatic trust I'd had before, more deliberate, like something I was choosing rather than something I'd inherited. The part I hadn't expected was Cody's exit from the story. I found out about it through my wife, about 6 weeks after all of this, which is how I know it counts as karma rather than anything I did. Apparently, he'd been doing the same thing. The easy flattery, the blurred lines, the when he's not around energy, with another woman at a competing firm. Married woman, different situation, messier ending. Her husband was not the type to sit in the dark running calculations. He was the type who calls the man's managing broker at 8 in the morning and copies 3 people on the email. Cody's reputation in their professional circle, which is small and specific and has a very long memory, took a hit he wasn't going to recover from quickly. I'm not proud of feeling satisfied by that. But I'm also not going to lie and say I didn't. Here's what I know, on the other side of it. My wife and I had both let something die in our marriage by not tending to it. She'd gone looking for what was missing in a direction she never should have looked. I'd been absent in ways I'd excused as normal wear, and I convinced myself that love on autopilot was still love. Neither of those things is the whole story, and neither of them is an excuse for the other, and anyone who wants to assign a clean percentage of blame to one side or the other didn't go through it with us. What I know is that Reese is still 9 and still obsessed with horses and still asks too many questions before school, and she doesn't know anything about any of this, and I intend to keep it that way for as long as I can. What I know is that we're still married, that we talked more than we'd talked in years about things that actually mattered, and it was uncomfortable in the way that true things often are, and something on the other side of it is different in a way I couldn't have predicted. What I know is that my wife called me at 3 in the afternoon last week, for no reason, just to tell me about something funny that had happened in a meeting. And I was in the middle of something at work, and I set it aside, and I laughed with her. And when I hung up, I sat there for a second thinking, that's it. That's the whole job. Not grand gestures, not surveillance, not any of the dramatic things you imagine in the dark at 11 at night when the world is rearranging itself. Just that. Showing up. Laughing. Choosing. Every time you get the chance to choose. I still choose her. And she chose to deserve it. That's all I've got. I've thought about what I'd tell someone going through what I went through, and the honest answer is I wouldn't tell them much. Not because there's nothing to say, but because the things that actually matter can't be handed to someone from the outside. You have to arrive at them yourself, usually through something that costs you. What I can say is this. The night I sat in the dark holding that phone, I had a choice about who I was going to be inside of it. I could have gone in swinging, loud, righteous, making sure she understood exactly what she'd done wrong. Part of me wanted to, but I kept thinking about Reese asleep upstairs, and about the version of this story that ends with her watching her parents dismantle each other in the kitchen at midnight. That image cooled something in me. Not the anger. The anger stayed, but it gave me enough distance to ask what I actually wanted, which turned out to be the truth more than I wanted to win. That's not a small thing. Most people, when they're hurt, want to win. They want the other person to feel the size of what they've done, and maybe there's a version of this where that's justified. But winning doesn't get you the truth. Staying calm does. Asking the real question does. Listening, even when what you're hearing is uncomfortable, does. I'm not a naturally patient man. Sitting across from my wife that night and keeping my voice level while she explained that another man made her feel smart and seen, that took something from me I didn't know I had. It turned out I had it. I just hadn't needed it before. The part I keep coming back to is what she said about being invisible. I told her she was beautiful so many times that it stopped meaning anything. The words were still there, but the attention behind them had dawned somewhere else, probably nowhere dramatic, just into the low hum of routine, of assuming that because we'd built something solid, it didn't need tending. I was wrong about that. A marriage doesn't stay solid on its own any more than anything else does. You have to keep showing up for it, not in grand gestures, and the small ones. The question you actually listen to the answer of. The event you go to even when you're tired. I'm not absolving her of what she did. She let something go further than it should have, and she knew it, and she made that choice one day at a time over a period of months. That's on her. But I can hold her accountable for her part and still be honest about mine. Both things are true at the same time. That's not weakness. That's just how reality works. What happened to Cody? The professional fallout? The reputation damage? I didn't engineer that, and I wouldn't have. Not because I didn't want him to face some consequence, but because the moment you start spending energy on someone else's punishment, you stop spending it on your own life. And my life was right here. Reese with her horse questions. The dog nudging my hand. My wife calling me in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon just to share something that made her laugh. That call was everything. That call was the whole point. You can lose yourself in the damage of a thing, or you can decide that the life you still have is worth more than the harm that was done to it. I chose the life. I'd make the same choice again.